overjoyed to welcome you all this evening. Thank you everyone for coming from near and far. My name is Shiza Shah and I'm the founder and CEO of UpEffect.
We're failing to address the world's greatest challenges. Not because we lack determination or resources, but because the right funds are not reaching the right people. So what are we at UpEffect going to do? We're revolutionizing crowdfunding by tipping the balance towards companies that contribute to livelihoods, to environmentalism, to job creation, and towards the fair distribution of wealth. How do we do that? We give founders personalized crowdfunding support and the tools that they need to pre-sell products and change their communities. We support entrepreneurs who aren't afraid to ask, how many lives can we change today? Our platform has already helped develop the first commercially available cook stove for rural Pakistan. We funded the reforestation of trees in Madagascar from the proceeds of hand-designed recycled greeting cards. We've even supported an innovative ethical clothing line that gives a voice to the voiceless. And we're just getting started. We're making it happen. What are you doing?
There are literally only a handful of people that are using their platforms to fight for justice and just straight up doing what's right in the world, and we thought it was really important to play our part in amplifying the message of what Hoda advocates on a day-to-day basis with her work. So here we are, and why did we at UpEffect decide to get involved in this? Well, we've seen that more than 82% of wealth created in 2017 alone went to 1% of the world's population. Half of the world is still living in poverty, while a relative handful reaps excessive wealth. The trillions of dollars spent on philanthropy and aid has done very little to bridge the gap between rich and poor, and poverty remains one of the biggest moral crises of our time right now. So a diminishing moral compass driven by capitalism and a greed to increase wealth has contributed to the rise in destructive industries, which has had a negative impact on wider society. Today's corporations are built on high profit margins, which are dependent on cheap labor and supply chains. Businesses are very much aware that more than 3 billion people live on less than £2 a day, and they're desperate to pursue any means necessary to acquire just a small amount of income so that they can put some bread on the table for their families. This positions the poor as ideal laborers and is why millions are subjugated at the hands of companies who are exploiting their precarious conditions. The fashion industry in particular is known for its exploitation of the poor, with 75 million garment workers, 85% of these being women, who are forced to make clothes on less than legal minimum wage. Basic health and safety measures are absent, and factories are rife with extensive human rights abuse and gender-based violence. This industry is also one of the world's largest polluters. Single brands roll out tens of seasons in a single year of cheap clothes, and this has resulted in the world consuming 80 billion pieces of new clothing every year. Businesses have the resources to lift people out of poverty, but such corporations will only make a drastic change if consumers boycott unethical brands and increase demand for businesses prioritizing ethical supply chains, ultimately driving their profits down. As we'll see from the examples this evening, more and more entrepreneurs are serving an expanding market for consumers that are increasingly recognizing the need for ethical solutions. Surveys have shown that 89% of millennials are likely to switch between brands and support ones that promote conscious spending. Issues such as equal pay, environmentally conscious manufacturing processes, human trafficking are at the forefront of their minds when they're making purchasing decisions. But unfortunately, where many conventional businesses have found success with investors, this new generation of social entrepreneurs is often bypassed by these same investors, as they have demonstrated time and time again that their interests are only piqued by profit-driven entities that are led by the same type of founders, white and male. Frustrated by the limited options afforded to these founders, often ethnic minorities or female founders, we founded UpEffect, a crowdfunding platform built on the premise that any entrepreneur with the potential to have a profound impact on the world should have the opportunity to turn their idea into a social venture. We equip entrepreneurs with the capital and skills to start and run their own impactful businesses without leaning on debt or investments. So every day at UpEffect, we see entrepreneurs with ambitious ideas striving to change the world, but having a vision and implementing this vision are two very different things. Many companies come with warm and fuzzy social mission statements, but very little data and evidence to support this. So we probe entrepreneurs with questions around how their processes measure against ethical requirements and expectations of stakeholders. What is their carbon footprint? Who are the suppliers and partners involved? What is the workforce compensation policies like? And what are the materials being used in the supply chain? One example is Brook the Cruise, an UpEffect client, which is an Australian fair trade clothing line that incorporates elements, quality and sustainability. All of their fair trade clothes are made lovingly in India from organic crops and non-toxic dyes, optimized for quality, comfort, and style. And the orders that she has placed with her production partner in India has contributed to providing a stable, dignified income for 37 Indians and Tibetan refugees that they employ. This is Shalini. Shalini is one of the women who work at the production house. She and the 36 others come from rural villages where equality is uncommon, and many at the tailoring center are refugees fleeing unethical and unideal situations. The percentage of women weavers increased from 5% to 35% in 4 years, and these women earn the same living wage as their male colleagues, allowing them economic independence. More and more businesses are lowering their carbon footprint and building human-facing policies that provide living wage opportunities to increase financial independence for the poor. This market will carry on to swell if consumers continue to vote with their wallets. Ultimately, the poorest in society should be able to trust that the system will not forget them, and that consumers have the power to build a world of financial equality and economic prosperity for all. So tonight we'll hear more on what we can do to build ethical businesses that work to the benefit of people on the planet. In particular, we'll hear from Hoda Katebi and Faris Sheibani on gluten production and Kima coffee, employing equitable business models in the fight for justice and ethics for vulnerable communities. Just before we do hear from our amazing speakers tonight, I want to take this opportunity to thank all those who have played a part in making tonight happen. So a huge, huge thank you to our partners and sponsors. Tonight would not have been possible without them. So our host, Islamic Finance and Ethics Society, is a student-run society that serves as a platform for students, academics, and business leaders to discuss the current and future practices of the global financial system from an Islamic ethical framework. Our media partner, Pebble Magazine, is everything you need for a stylish, sustainable life, from ethical fashion advice to eco-travel inspiration. And our promotional partner, Emerald Network, UK's longest established professional social network, showcasing Muslim arts, businesses, and charities. A special thank you to our sponsors, Good Joe, Do It Now, Atlas Supporters, India, and Natakalam. Natakalam is a social enterprise, and they're here at the front this evening. They're connecting displaced persons with language learners worldwide for online practice. So individuals fleeing conflict often face tremendous work restrictions and language barriers in their host countries. So Natakalam provides them with opportunities to gain livelihoods as conversation partners and language tutors. And these language tutors have earned over $500,000 through the platform and through the work of Natakalam. So finally, a huge thank you to Hafsa, who has been quietly building the engine for tonight, along with my family and friends, including my husband, who couldn't be here tonight, who have continuously supported the UpEffect journey. So just some housekeeping. So our hashtag for the evening is up on the screen. These are the social handles. Please do tweet everyone. And let's make ethical business and social enterprise the norm so that we don't have to use these labels to define business. All businesses should be held to these ethical standards. Seeing the massive economic and social challenges Yemen faced, Faris gradually developed the ambition to improve the lives of this native Yemeni people. After completing an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering at Imperial College London and a master's in engineering and management at the University of Cambridge, Faris worked in the oil and gas sector for several years, gaining experience in process engineering, business development, and commodity trading. Faris planned to use his experience to develop Yemen's energy infrastructure and offer basic power services to the country. In 2015, civil war broke out in Yemen and forced Faris to seek alternative ways to support Yemen. The search led Faris to working in Yemeni coffee, which he views as a fundamental part of Yemen's history and a critical part of its post-conflict socio-economic recovery. Here is Faris sharing more on how he is building Kima Coffee.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So, first of all, loads of thanks. Thank you to UpEffect for hosting me. Thank you guys all for coming and attending. Thank you to Hoda and Lohiya for joining us. I am inspired really by what everyone is doing in the different organizations who are represented here doing. And I am honored to be a part of this collective group. I suppose we're all here to talk about whether we can use business as a way to build a more equitable future and more equitable world. Obviously, my answer is a resounding emphatic yes. And I'm going to use the next 15 or 20 minutes or so to make the case for that yes, with an important condition. So my answer is really yes, but. And I'm going to talk about why yes, and what the but is, and why that but is critical as a condition. But for anyone sitting in the room who would like to use business as a way to improve the world and actually be financially and economically successful, the good news is you can do that. So good business is good for business. So I encourage you, through this presentation, I hope that's what you get out of it, I encourage people to actually go out and do that, and I assure them and reassure them that they can combine the two, and it's not a trade-off. So this is a graph, a nice chart to qualify what I'm saying. As lots of data has been mentioned by Shiza, this also is some supporting data that firms and establishments and organizations that have a social ethos as a fundamental part of their goods or services will outperform other companies. And so this compares the firms of endearment, which are good firms, quote unquote, against the 500 largest companies in America, and it shows that they outperform financially, economically, over a 15-year period by 14x. So this is just a statistic to really summarize the fact that you can do good business and be financially successful. What's the what? What's the why? Sorry, what's the condition? What's the but? I said yes, but. So I believe that you can't fake good business. You can't fake it. I think it has to be a fundamental part of who you are, and you have to really know why you're doing it. And I really believe this. And I believe that it's important because without it, you won't be able to overcome the challenges that you will undoubtedly face. And without it, your stakeholders will see through your inauthenticity. And they'll see through the dissonance that you manifest. And so why is really important. And so before we all start thinking about what and rushing off to start businesses that will save the world and do really well, it's really important to actually sit down and really dig deep and like why, why, the big why with capital W. And so I think the core of good business is purpose. And this is what we're here to talk about, conscious capitalism. And purpose is the consciousness of conscious capitalism. Right? Purpose is really the fundamental why behind why we're trying to use capitalism to solve the world. And so capitalism, conscious capitalism is where a high state purpose, a why, meets an intention to solve a problem using three people and free markets. That's how I define it. And so the natural question is, well, great, Faris, what's your why? You know, what's your purpose? And help us relate. And so, in order to understand my why, I have to dig into my history. I think to know where you want to go, you have to see where you came from. And so I dug into my history. And my history starts in Yemen with my grandfather. He's an integral part of who I am. And my grandfather was born 90 years ago almost in the village of Sheibani. My name is Faris Sheibani. That's the village, the tribe that we come from, Sheibani. And he was born in the first 13 years of his life he spent as a shepherd and a farmer. And after 13 years he left because he found no viable and sustainable future in shepherding and farming. And he set up a tea and coffee shack, a little shack, shed, in the city. And that shed became 2 sheds, and those sheds became a distributorship, and that became a factory, and those factories became 10 factories. And today he's still alive, still in Yemen, and today he is the owner and founder of one of Yemen's largest industrial groups. And I'm saying this because I'm trying to make the point that my grandfather broke out of the poverty cycle using capitalism. And guess what? His capitalism was very conscious. Over the 7-8 years that his business existed, he has changed hundreds upon thousands of lives. And so he knew conscious capitalism before the term was coined, right? Before we all came about talking about it. And the only reason that I am here and that I have had such an interesting, contrasting journey is because of him. Were it not for my grandfather breaking out of the poverty cycle, I would not be here today standing and talking to you. In fact, I would probably be in Yemen earning less than £2 a day. And really through his effort and through luck, because what business is successful without luck? I am here today. And luck is fortune. And so at some level I feel that society, God, the universe, nature, however you want to see it, has been very fortunate, has been very kind to me. And so I am indebted to, right? And I'm going to make the case that if you do that, if you really do that, if you do it in a smart way, then actually it will be good for business. And I'm going to try and make that case over the upcoming slides. So the first problem, I sell really bad quality coffee. Really bad, like neglected, stepped upon, mixed with like goats and sheep, really bad, you know? And they were trying to sell that. I was like, well, you're not going to be able to do that. If you want to sell something good, it has to be good. And I was like, this coffee represents Yemen, so it's really important that we have a positive representation of Yemen. And so we set up the Middle East's largest specialty coffee processing center, and really one of the world's most sophisticated processing centers, coffee processing centers, state of the art, has everything you can imagine from a coffee perspective. And it is able to produce really, really high quality coffee. Not easy to build, not in the midst of a war, but really high quality coffee. And we did that because we thought that's what we want to represent of Yemen. And why was it good for business? As a result, our coffee was really good quality. And actually, we set the record for the highest priced coffee, Yemeni coffee, ever. We sold one of our batches of coffee at $350 a kilo. So good for business. We didn't mean to do it, but it was good for business. The next thing, I saw exploited farmers. Guys forgotten, taken advantage of, not only in terms of price, given a tiny fraction of the end price, but also put into endless cycles of debt that they just could not get out of. And I was like, well, okay, I want to go to these guys, and not only do I want to give them a better price, it's really nice, give them a high price, but actually, it needs to go beyond that. They deserve a share of the benefit. So I was like, no, don't talk about buying and selling, talk about partnerships. Talk about partnerships. You deserve a share of this coffee. So I'm going to take your coffee, I'm going to give you double the price, just up front, I don't care, I don't mind, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to sell this coffee, and whatever I sell it at, I'm going to give you a proportional. And through that, you see that thing here? You see that? So, some of our farmers, 1 or 2 of our farmers especially, we were able to increase incomes by 20 times, 2,000%. I've never ever seen that before in coffee. I'm not here to blow my trumpet or talk about how good we are. I'm just trying to make a case for what you can do if you really set your mind to it. And if you think, I think, in a methodical way, with a purpose. On average, by the way, on average we increase incomes by about 6 or 7 times. 600 to 700% on average. And remember this guy as well, okay? I'm going to come back to him, the guy on my right. Remember this Mubarak? The guy I showed you when I went into Yemen? So, The other problem we saw was intransparent trade. The customers didn't know where they were getting their coffee from, and it was normally mixed with really illegally mixed with like Chinese coffee and African coffees, and it was sold to Yemeni. But also the farmers, the farmers didn't know where the coffee was going. And if you have incomplete information, you are weak. You know, you can be taken advantage of. And so I was like, no, we want two-way transparent trade. Two-way. The farmer needs to know where the coffee is going, and the buyer needs to know where the coffee came from. And so this guy, who was one of the first farmers I met, we did an initiative with him last month, where we took his coffee, sold it, and gave 100% of the proceeds, everything that we made, to him to help build the reservoir for him. Guess what? Once he builds the reservoir, he's able to increase his coffee production by 3-fold. He increases it by 3-fold, his income increases by 21-fold. So actually, build him a reservoir, he doesn't need you for life. That's it, he's set. And the last thing that we saw was no route to market, I call it, but what I want to really call it is a structurally unjust value chain. Okay? The way that coffee is bought and sold and traded along the chain is structurally unjust, I feel. And so these are all the different, these are all the different players, right? Farmer, trader, exporter, importer, roaster. And I went to each of these guys and I was like, hey, are you a social business? You know, do you have conscious capitalism? And they're like, nobody cares, they just want a margin. I was like, well, if you all want margins and nobody really cares about anyone, none of you care about this guy, I'm going to cut you out. Yeah, I'm going to cut you out. If we could work, and we didn't do this with everyone, some guys we actually worked with, who we felt our values aligned, but most of them were just there to extort and exploit. Cut them out, and we took the role. We do all of that. We do the trading in Yemen, we do the exporting, the importing, the roastery here in London, and then we sell it to the cafe and the consumer directly. And guess what? We capture all of the money these guys were making. And what do we do with it? We redistribute it back to the farmer. It was something that we felt that we did. It was good, and it ended up being good business. And so, okay, you know, you've done all this stuff, Faris, you know, but what have you really achieved, right? Beyond the fluffy stuff, right? Beyond the fluffy stuff. So we are now Yemen's largest specialty coffee exporter. We represent about 70% of the market. We have developed significant traction in marketing. We have operational headquarters in Yemen. We have roastery and marketing headquarters in London. We have offices in China now, offices in Dubai. We have around 100 roasteries that we deal with, and they each have 10 to 100 cafes. So our coffee is reaching everywhere, and we're doing very well, thankfully. Let's talk about our farmers. We started with 30 farming families. The next season, last season, we had 800 farming families. The upcoming season, we have 2,500 farming families signed up. Farming families, that's the equivalent of 15,000 people from the rural community. 15,000 people we can affect, we can impact. And just if you talk about numbers, last season we redistributed about $200,000 back to the farming, in additional income. $200,000 in additional income back to the farmers. And lastly, and this is really what we're about taking destruction and taking it to beauty. We're about taking Yemen's name, which is associated with death and poverty and children being malnutrition and all that horrible stuff that's true, and really changing the narrative into that's positive. And so the coffee of the guy who was standing on my right, I have on his way, we sold it to Chef Lucas, who is arguably the world's most famous chef. He sells his coffee at £15 a cup in King's Cross in London. And that's really what we're about, you know, changing something that's horrible into something that's beautiful. My time's probably running out. So I've given you guys a really nice story about purpose, and if you have purpose, you can achieve great things. But I also want to end with a somewhat sobering and realistic note that you will face challenges. And it's important to be able to overcome them. In order to be able to overcome those challenges, I believe you really need the why. That's when you really need purpose. And I'm going to use a story, just one story, and there are many, just one story of what we faced in Yemen to try and illustrate that point, and to try and illustrate the power of purpose. And I don't want to sound too metaphysical, but I really believe that purpose can achieve things that you cannot imagine. And this is a quote from a survivor of a Nazi Holocaust camp. He writes a book, really interesting book, called The Quest for Meaning or The Search for Meaning. And he talks about how meaning was fundamental to him in surviving through some of the most horrible experiences imaginable to human beings. And this is a story, these are pictures that we captured. In December 2017, our site in Yemen was surrounded by two conflicting or battling political groups, and we were right in the middle. We were slap bang in the middle. And I had left an hour before. I had left and I was on the way to another region. They surrounded the site and they started relentlessly bombing it. Okay, they surrounded it with snipers and they started relentlessly bombing with mortar fire. And I left, and then I heard what had happened, and I immediately called the guy, and this guy is called Hamza. That's Hamza Hamdi. He is one of our coffee hunters, one of our team. And I said, Hamza was there, and I said, Hamza, and I could hear, and I still remember, I could hear the mortars going off in the background. You could hear them like meters away. And I said, Hamza, leave now. Sometimes I get upset when I think of this. He refused. He refused. He said, if we lose this, we lose everything. I will not leave. And he spent 6 days barricaded in there, eating water and biscuits. 6 days eating water and biscuits under relentless mortar fire that you cannot imagine. And the reason I'm mentioning it is to help illustrate the challenges that you can face and the importance of purpose in overcoming those challenges. The only reason he was willing to sacrifice his life was for purpose. Positive purpose, not a destructive death that we see. I've spoken for too long. Thank you very much for listening. This is my email. I believe that community is a fundamental part of this thing really working. Questions, queries, email me. I might be slowing getting back, but more than happy to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faris. I'm sure we're all going to be excited to watch the growth of Kima Coffee turn into an amazing business, a thriving business in the coffee industry. And it's absolutely incredible the work that you're doing for the farm holders in Yemen. So we're just 5 minutes behind schedule, but we're good. So it's now time for tonight's conversation with Hoda Katebi and Georgina from Pebble magazine. So many of you have probably read or engaged with Hoda's work in some capacity, but for those of you that don't know, Hoda is an American ethical fashion and culture critic, writer and activist, the voice behind Juju Azad, the radical political fashion online publication held from the BBC to Vogue to the New York Times, and the author of the book Tehran Street Style, the first ever in-print documentation and celebration of illegal fashion in Iran. She also hosts the Cosby Bread, a radical international book club with meetups in cities around the world. Hoda recently launched Gluten Production, a refugee and immigrant women's clothing production co-op, working to provide alternatives to sweatshops. Hoda is a radical anti-capitalist and a rising voice in the fashion industry. She's at the forefront of questioning labor practices and fast fashion, misconceptions of Islam, or exclusion in feminism. Hoda's academic research explores the intersections of fashion, gender, and the state in Iran. She runs on saffron ice cream and colonizers' tears. So a huge round of applause to welcome Hoda on stage. Tonight's conversation will be led by Georgina Wilson-Powell. Georgina is a passionate journalist and magazine editor who is using her 16 years in the media industry for global change.
Right now, I've got lots of questions, so we will kind of dive into it because I'm sure we can spin off in lots of different directions. As we're both so passionate about talking about fashion and ethical fashion and problems in fashion. But just before we get started, I want to say what an honour it is to have you here in the UK, and I know it's a great honour to have you here this evening with all of us, and I think everyone's super excited to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, UpEffect, for having me and for all of the sponsors of tonight's event. I'm so grateful to be in this wonderfully diverse city. It's so gorgeous. I've been working on my British accent, so if at any point in time my American accent you just can't understand it, let me know and I'll switch over to it.
good to know. Yeah. Totally fine. Yeah. Before we do dive into the highs and lows of fashion, and there are lots of both, you describe yourself, as we heard, sort of an anti-capitalist, angry daughter of Muslim Iranian immigrants. What makes you angry? Let's tell a little bit about you. What's your story? How did you get into fashion to begin with?
I identify as angry, like very proudly. I think anyone who was born and raised in Oklahoma would probably feel the same way. For those of you who don't know, Oklahoma is right above Texas, but just as racist. And so for me, growing up in a state and suburb that was wildly like white, wildly racist, homogeneously conservative, and being the only one who wore a hijab growing up, like people didn't actually know what I was, let alone like be racist. So for the longest time, they thought I was a witch. It was wild. And then once like people started becoming slowly politically aware, they realized that I was Muslim, and then became the fill-in for every single Muslim identity in the Middle East that was trending. So I was Palestinian, I was Afghan, I was Iraqi, I was everything that was sort of making headlines during that time. And the more you sort of get called this or that, or like, why did you do 9/11? Things that I'm sure half the people in this room have heard themselves too. You just start to learn and like read, and the more that you read, the more angry that you get naturally. And I think if all of us have not a little bit of anger, then I think that we may not know what's happening in the world. So I think anger is, it definitely drives a lot of what I do.
I think it's justified. Yeah.
Yes.
Lots of different reasons at the moment. Yeah.
Definitely.
So there's lots of sort of passion, let's say, for changing the world and for getting things started. And how did you sort of end up in the fashion sphere? Because I'm gathering with your sort of wide interest, you could have gone in lots of different directions.
Possibly. My parents might have been more happy. But I think for me, fashion was something that I could care less about until I realized from a political perspective how radically powerful it really is. So when I moved to Chicago in 2012, and started to reflect on my experiences growing up in Oklahoma and realizing that it wasn't normal to be called a terrorist going grocery shopping. Like that was just like wild to me. I was like, wow, like I don't get flipped off taking the bus. This is like such a wild country. And for me, I was reflecting a lot of those experiences, and I realized that fashion was really, along with race, obviously, really sort of like a guiding factor in the way that people reacted toward me. So if I wore a scarf around my neck, I probably would have gotten punched in the face, And so thinking about fashion as a mode of a very powerful communication that really conveys a lot of what we do and the way that we act, but the way that people also react to us. And sort of that being my framework of starting to get into fashion, and realizing that I could have conversations about politics using fashion as almost like a guide to do so. So when I first started my publication, Juju Azad, my goal was to educate white people. They've changed now, but I thought that if I posted a picture of myself from the waist down on what I thought would attract white people, i.e. Pinterest, I would post it there, and then people would click through, and I'd be like, hey, we're not all terrorists, surprise, I'm wearing a hijab. So for me, that was sort of my in on bringing politics into spaces that weren't there. And Teen Vogue, before they were woke, they also reached out to me. They're like, hey, there's not many hijabis doing fashion. We can post your photos on our website, but we don't want any of your politics. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So I'd send them an outfit post, but then Andre, when they asked me to describe, they're like, describe your outfit, and I was like, 5 reasons why Israel's an apartheid state. And they published it, because no one reads where you get your jeans from, no one cares. So for the longest time, Teen Vogue had 5 reasons why Israel's an apartheid state under my cute little outfit, posing around, and so
like a real style.
The outfit, I don't remember what I was wearing, it was something dumb, but the point was I could use this mode of communication and in a way allow myself to be tokenized sometimes if I could make sure that my voice was going to be there in the ways that I wanted. So I learned fashion can be powerful in order to have conversations that people might not be ready for.
Definitely, and I think it's almost going back to a very old view of fashion, rather than being a trend-led, consumer-led ideal. It's much more about who you are and presenting an ideal and challenging stereotypes and challenging sort of larger cultural issues. And I think you talk about on your publication how you should think about what's next to your skin, because it's next to your skin all day, every day. So what is it that you want to wear? And I think there's not many people putting that political, very out there slant on fashion, and especially on blogs and Instagram as well. I think that really makes you stand out.
Thank you. But yeah, I do think that fashion is very inherently political as well. So beyond just being able to convey, like class, for example, on the way that you're dressing, I think fashion is a form of art, and all art is political. Like anybody who says they're doing apolitical art is like bullshit, right? That they don't know what they're talking about, because you're either using this powerful mode of communication as a way to challenge the status quo, make people think differently, make people think and ask questions about social issues, or you're not, and you're silent, and silence is complacency. So you can sit and like paint flowers all day, but that's still political because that's a conversation about your privilege of being able to do so. And so fashion is also a form of art. I do think that capitalism has sort of like taken the art out of it and just turning it into this mindless commodity. But on top of just like the ability of us to convey messages like on our clothing, fashion also, as you mentioned, that I wrote about on Juju Azad, there's nothing else that really touches your skin as much as fashion does. Like what does that mean for us, especially as Muslims, like on a spiritual level, that the thing that is touching your skin the most, literally rubbing off on you, is made as a product of violence. Hijabs, for example, if they're like a religious item, how can we say that our hijabs were made in sweatshops at the expense of like Muslim women? So I think these are questions that we should be asking ourselves, and even production and consumption. The fact that the majority of our clothes are made in Bangladesh and Southeast Asia, but the majority of the consumers are here in the West, so what does that say about imperialism? What does that say about power dynamics? And so there's so much that can really become like unwound when we start talking about fashion in what I think is like a feminist way, and not like white Hillary Clinton feminist, but like legitimately like intersectionally feminist. The idea that the fashion industry has historically been dominated by women, both as consumers and producers. Women have always dominated the fashion industry. But if I say, like, but we always view it as like silly and shallow and vain, because it's women's work. But if I say like my older brother's a car designer, like everyone's like, oh, so cool, so intellectual. But like, he's read one book in his life since kindergarten. But like, so it's, and so we have this idea that it's like so intellectual, or like architecture, so intellectual, but like when it comes to fashion design, oh, they're just into fashion, they're like dumb, you know? And so there's this disconnect when it comes to women's work, that we don't value it in the way that it should be. And so being able to understand that a shirt shouldn't cost £5, is problematic, because we're devaluing the women's labor that's going into making that £5 shirt.
And do you think, for too long as well on the consumer side, that people haven't thought about where the clothes come from and where they end up past the bin? There seems to be a kind of blinker. Like they just arrive at shops, and then when we're sick of them, they go into a bin or a charity shop.
People think that like machines still make clothing. Guys, people make your clothes. Every single piece of clothes has gone through like millions, or not millions, like many hands to be able to have been produced. But like I don't understand why people still think that it's like a machine that just like comes in, comes out, like somehow the cotton is harvested, produced, picked, turned into a shirt, sent out all by a machine, and it still makes sense that it costs £5.
I think that there's not we talk a lot on the site how fashion is sort of following the food cycle. So you have the slow food movement, the organic food movement, a lot's changed, and fashion is slowly sort of following that art. And I think it goes back to a lot of people thinking that the food is just manufactured, and they don't think about where that comes from, and they don't think of people picking their food. And I think, up until the last few years, people haven't thought about the fact that it's cotton, it's natural fibres, it's being picked, it's being made by people, probably usually in horrible conditions. And I think there is a lot more conversations happening. Yours is one of them, that gets people to think about the entire life cycle, rather than just what you visually see in the shop. Would you say it's more empowering, more positive sort of conversations that are happening over the last few years?
I low-key hate the term empowering, but I do think that there is a shift right now within the fashion industry. Like everyone wants to be ethical, and there's obviously pros and cons to that. I think that right now, especially after the election of Trump, who is our new leader in the United States, there's this sort of normalization, or like push toward activism. Like everyone wants to be an activist, and there's a lot of pros to that. Like I think that now you can say that if you protest, you're not seen as like this like cliche, like random person who like just protests, but like everyone's now protested at some point in their lives, which is great. And brands especially too, like a lot of brands are trying to be like ethical and trying to like head in like, oh, like we have a sustainable collection, like Zara, H&M, like all of these fast fashion brands. But it also just really lowers the bar and simplifies the conversation. Holding a sign in the street doesn't make you an activist, and like I think that we have to think about community organizing and like systemic changes that I think people aren't necessarily ready for that conversation. So I do feel like a lot of brands, Nike for example, endorsing Kaepernick. I think everyone knows. Okay, yeah, you guys know what's happening in the United States. We don't know what's happening here. Nike endorsing Kaepernick, for example, was like this huge thing. The organizers were like, oh my God, yay! They like care about race, but Nike's still being produced in sweatshops, and all of those clothes are still being produced in sweatshops. Nike also is the official team of the NFL, or the official like jersey. So how are they funding like both sides of the war, essentially? I don't think that counts though. So I think that there's like a push toward ethics that now people just want to see a face, they want to see a hijab and feel like, oh yeah, they support Muslims, check. But like if you actually look deeper, it's very problematic, I think, because we're not allowing ourselves to look at things beyond what they're being essentialized as.
I completely agree with you.
And being able to like look at, I think, the larger picture. So it's not just about like buying this or that. It's more like, what am I doing like as an individual to change the way that I like exist in this world that can like maybe make it better for like people who like don't have access to like the privileges that I do here.
Definitely. And you touched on garment workers here a little bit again now. Have you seen a sort of improvement in work in the lives of garment workers since you started on this journey, or stuff?
No. If anything, I think a lot of it has gotten worse because like fast fashion is only accelerating, and the thing about capitalism is like I feel like it's going to kill itself. Inshallah. Because at the end of the day, you are only like you're just exhausting a larger and larger population of people. And so capitalism is going to be the death of itself. And what's happening right now in the fashion industry is that people are just buying more and more. And these brands are doing really great at now like advertising to me. Like I've never felt like seen by a brand before, and now I have like ads for Nike all the time. And so it's weird to be like targeted by an ad by a brand that like you felt like never knew you existed, which kind of preferred it that way. So I do think that there's a huge rise in fast fashion production, which then creates an even larger burden for garment workers. I've interviewed, or had the like wild honor of interviewing a lot of garment workers across Southeast Asia, and according to their experiences, like things have just gotten worse because what the conditions look like is all based on demand. And when there's these impossible standards that are placed on garment workers that are intentional for them not to be able to meet, and when you know that you can't meet that goal, you get to then insert violence in order to make these garment workers work faster and reach speeds that are like actually humanly impossible. And the more production that is now required, the more pressure there is, and the more violence that's just escalating in garment factories.
So where does this go before it gets bad?
To hell.
Not to get too
low key though.
Yeah.
Where does it go before it gets better? It needs to get better anyway. I don't know
yeah.
The question.
I mean, what can we? I mean, you were saying this is increasing. Mm-hmm. What can brands do? What can consumers do to stop that kind of onslaught?
I think a lot of things. I think again, kind of going back to community organizing and trying to understand that there's like a reason why you probably haven't heard any voices of garment workers. There is actually a quote by Arlene Roy that I love, and she says, "There's no such thing as the voiceless. There's only the systematically silenced and the preferably unheard." And there's never been a more like factual quote to describe garment workers. Like for example, I myself wrote a piece interviewing many garment workers who are working in H&M's sustainable collection factories, Gap, and submitted it to Teen Vogue, and they at first said yes, and after they read the piece, they said they're not legally allowed to publish that piece. So a lot of like Condé Nast brands, a lot of just like fashion publications have actual contracts with H&M, Gap, and a lot of these corporations that don't allow garment workers' voices to legitimately be published. So, and I think that's the way with a lot of people. So like, and there's a reason why these voices shouldn't or like cannot be present in a lot of Western spaces. Survivors of drone, for example, people in Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen. So thank you for being here. And so I do think that there's a reason why we can't hear a lot of the times their voices. It's not because they're voiceless, it's because their very realities would shatter the very fundamentals of what this country says that it's built on, or what they're saying they're trying to spread to the Middle East. And so I think that it's really important that we understand that as consumers and as just individuals living in this empire, and are able to, like, with that then, like, use it, right? So beyond just like shopping, because I don't think that you can buy the revolution. I don't think that you can ever like buy a right choice. I do think that you have to take a step back and kind of view the picture as this global issue that we need to be addressing.
I think touching on your sort of media comments, that was one of the reasons I set up Hubble 18 months ago, was I was trying to pitch exactly the same stories that you're talking about to TiVo, and got stonewalled completely again and again and again. And it was like, hang on a minute, why aren't we picking up these stories? And I wanted to run a magazine where the only brands that we worked with commercially were brands that were, fit for purpose and B Corps and sort of certified down the line. And it means that we can actually run the stories that we feel passionate about and not have to think, oh, hang on a minute, we are tied by a commercial avenue. And I think that is the difference between the mainstream media and a lot of the sort of publications that we're talking about and love, is they don't want to show this other side of consumerism. They want it to be, oh, you want something sustainable, oh, you can buy a sustainable collection, here you go. Yeah. And not look at the complex issues. And I think it's really interesting, really empowering, really inspiring to see so many people here as well, and for lots of talks that we do, turning up to learn more and understand more so that they can make better choices and support better brands. So I think there is a sort of shift that everybody here is a part of. Do you sort of, looking at sort of brands that are sort of for purpose and are trying to do good, is there a sort of checklist in your head or something that you feel where you can go, okay, they're trying to do the right thing, they are succeeding at what they're trying to do? Or do you find very few companies like that?
I think there are very few companies like that. I do think that I think there's like a standard, like would I buy from a brand? Sure, but would I like work with them, for example? I think that's a different line. I do think that, like going back to that issue of like race, for example, in the ethical fashion world, I do think that a lot of ethical fashion, because it's so inaccessible, is really run by white women, and so being able to find sustainable brands run by like black women, women of color, is like difficult, but like even more important to like only work with certain brands. Yeah. So I think, I think you have to have high standards to some extent, but also it doesn't have to be like dumb high. Like it can just be like garment workers aren't treated like ish, and that can be a standard that you have. And I think everyone needs to make that decision for themselves.
Have you seen a particular country that treats garment workers better than say other countries, or is it not on a sort of national scale? It's very much pocketed.
I think it's an industry issue. So I think anywhere that fast fashion is happening, then the garment workers aren't treated right, because it's like, again, there's no way to do that. I think obviously garment workers across like countries of color, so across Africa and across the Middle East and Southeast Asia, are treated particularly bad because violence is seen very normalized, and there's just like a lack of like care for like the well-being of people there, and they're just so far removed and so far like otherized that people here don't even care that they don't know where their clothes comes from.
Yeah, we've got a long way to go. I mean, obviously it's London Fashion Week this week, and a really big buzz at the moment. There is a lot of sustainable fashion. Catwalks happening, shows happening. It's sort of one of the terms being bandied about sort of more than ever. But also announced today that the Environmental Action Committee, one of the government committees here, want to put 1 pence tax on sort of fast fashion. Do you think the whole ethical fashion is, especially around fashion, is it a luxury niche that we're never going to get breaking into the mainstream, or do you think there's ever a way for sort of fast fashion and ethical fashion to meet anywhere in the middle for the greater good?
I don't think fast fashion. I'm an abolitionist, which means that I think that there are certain industries that can only be reformed so far until they just hit a wall and you realize that they just have to like completely like disappear. So I think slavery is always a really easy example. Like there's no way that you can reform slavery to make it better. It needs to like get abolished altogether. And I think that there's a lot of industries that we take for granted in the West that should be abolished. I think fast fashion is one of them. There's no way that you can reform an industry that is built on and requires violence in order to function. You can reform that. You can reform it to make it less violent, but it's still violent. So So I don't think that fast fashion can ever get reformed into like something that's ethical. I do think that there are many ways that we can make, I think people also have this idea that like ethical fashion is like hundreds of pounds or like hundreds of dollars, but it doesn't have to be, and there's a lot that is like more accessibly, of course that's like a privileged comment and people can understand that in different ways, but I do think that we do understand ethical fashion to be a lot more expensive than it typically tends to be. But on top of that, like, we invest in so many things, and why can't one of them be fashion? If we really understand like the lifespan of what it takes for a shirt to be made, or for anything to be made, from like the harvesting of raw materials to the processing, transporting, producing, transporting again, like selling, and all of those people make profit, then there is no way that that can be cheap. And if it is, then there is violence somewhere happening. So I think that it just goes back again, like we should just be investing in clothes like we invest in other things.
But in a way, it's like buying cheap coffee and sort of pouring it down the drain the moment you get it. You buy something, you buy something cheap and you don't look after it. There's a lot of hashtags around 30 wears, sort of talking about buying something and trying to think about how many times you wear it to get true value. And also, sort of from an environmental point of view, wearing something and keeping something going for 9 months saves 30% of sort of carbon and water footprint. So it's all on that side of things. Keeping things going is a lot better. That's it. But I feel like a lot of this, we're sort of repeating ourselves a lot of the time on things that people can do. What do you think, what would it take to get a really big shift and sort of getting people more active, more politically active, more conscious about their shopping?
A revolution.
What is revolution?
I'm kidding. Not really. I think that again, I think it goes back to community organizing. I think that a lot of us have this like the idea that we can buy ethical and therefore save the world, or like buy ethical and like save a refugee, but that's a very flawed, like privileged, like white supremacy, like and whatever thinking. And I think that we need to be thinking about things structurally and like thinking of them within a context, right? So again, going back to like fashion connected to the military, connected to police, prisons, like if we can understand and like take a step back and look at how everything's related, then I think we can also think about ways that we can like pinpoint ways of like attack, challenging it. Prevent is like very strong here, so I have to like beat her.
I mean, there are some people who are taking that community organisation in different industries and having great effects. So perhaps like Occupy Wall Street a few years ago, or looking at sort of the climate challenges, the guys, the March for Our Lives against gun violence. Are you sort of looking at those kind of mass actions and seeing how we can relate them to fashion?
Yeah, I think they are related to fashion. I think they're related to like everything. So, yeah.
Any questions from the audience, but I would love to start the Q&A session with a question of my own. So a lot of the bigger brands are known to launch conscious lines, and often it can be seen as a greenwashing ploy. So what are your thoughts on genuine ways that these corporates can get involved in making a difference, and also getting smaller organizations involved in their work?
Yeah, I don't think that corporations are going to be leading any social change. I think that a lot of corporations intend on having a great public image that makes people feel like they're doing good, but it's usually just to counteract all of the years of destructive work that they might have been doing. So I think, for example, like Nike, H&M, people that are using, for example, the image of like a Muslim model to like say that we support Muslims, whereas your garment workers who are exploiting are still Muslim women, or corporations that are sort of also focused on a capitalistic understanding of value, so just like building profit and building money without and just wanting to donate some of that. I don't think that that necessarily is like where community building happens, and that's I think what's most important for me. So yeah, I think corporations aren't going to do the revolution, but I do think that we should be holding them accountable. We should be holding a lot of people accountable who are trying to say that they're supporting a community that they may just be on the surface level supporting a community. So I think it's our responsibility to be able to like think deeper and more complex about like what it means to see like a Nike Pro hijab or like images that are brands that are trying to cater to us in the attempt that they're supporting us, whereas it's all just like corporate.
Yeah. A lot of it's driven by wealth.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Thank you so much. So, any questions?
The other side is always.
There's another microphone.
We've got another mic coming around that side.
Hi, I'm on TikTok. I have a quick question. So you mentioned we can't just produce clothes with machines, but why not? Like now, like in the future, so like now we can 3D print things like kidney that can go in a human body, or backpack furniture that can be just made by 3D printers. So can something like that, do you think, be applied to the fashion world? Can people just design their own clothes with a computer or alter a size and then press the print button on a machine and print for them?
That's an interesting question. I think fashion innovation right now is like wild. There's a lot of amazing things that are happening in terms of like technological advancements in the fashion industry. But I do think that at the end of the day, there are some parts of fashion that would be, I mean, God knows, like maybe we'll get to a day where like robots rule all of us. But like before we get to that point, I think that there's so much to get there, and the complexity of making maybe like a simple T-shirt could be possibly machine made in the future, but something that like is like actual like designed, conceptually put together, and requires a lot of art and like conceptualization to create. I don't think that machines can. I mean, you can have a machine paint a painting, but that's not the same. I think that fashion, if we're able to look at it as an art form, is really complex, and especially the construction of that, and that's also something that I think a lot of people maybe haven't understood, like how complicated it is to create even a simple shirt. So God knows where we'll be in 10 years, especially you guys are having Brexit, so like I don't know how that affects things. Who expected that, right? Maybe we'll have robots make clothes. I don't think it would be anywhere in like the immediate future. I probably will die before that happens.
Hi, thank you so much. There's a lot of talk around the creation of fashion, but there's not as much talk around the cyclical journey of fashion, like what happens afterwards. And I think the view of charity is quite white supremacist, in the view that giving your clothes to charity is going to go to some poor kids in India or in Africa.
The city of Africa.
Literally, it's craziness. And I wonder what your view is on how we dispose of broken fashion as well as fashion that is still wearable but not something that people want to wear.
That's a really good question. I do think that people think that Goodwill is like a trash can. You guys have Goodwill here, right? Charity shop.
We have lots of
Part of like the trash can of your clothes, which is, again, as you mentioned, like wildly problematic. Even a lot of clothes, like the majority of clothes that are donated to like thrift stores or like charity shops, are actually then flooding a lot of South African markets. So a lot of South African fashion industry is actually dying because of this overflow of like really bad American designed and like UK designed clothing. And I think that that's a great question. I wish that like fashion innovation has brought us to a point where like our clothes could like compost or something when it's finished. But we're not at a place right now where clothing can actually be recycled. So Zara and H&M said that they have recycling programs. Probably less than 1% of all of that actually gets recycled because it's recyclable. Unfortunately, it's just not, and if you want to jump into it, it's just not something that we're at right now.
One of the things that's come out today is they're talking about putting a 1 pence tax on all fast fashion, which would then go into recycling programs. But the problem is a lot of the materials that they use to make this fast fashion, they can't be recycled because they're just so crap. And they're so loaded with chemicals that they don't biodegrade and you can't recycle them. So there is a massive problem at the other end of this fast fashion where we're just clogging up landfill with more and more cheap t-shirts. So I think part of the sort of missing, for me, a bit of the missing part of the circle is this overconsumption problem, because we've got to tackle that, and we've got to tackle what happens at the end of it. And there are amazing people working on biodegradable clothes and biodegradable fabrics and mushroom leather and Pinatex and algae and all sorts of different things, but right this minute we need to just stop buying that cheap stuff, and because we've got nowhere to put it. You know, once it goes through your wardrobe to your bin or to a thrift store or to a charity shop, where does it go next? So I think that is the problem.
Just a comment on that, then, I guess, is just very quickly, what are your views on people like Patagonia then, who are repairing clothes and taking, who say anything that you don't want to wear anymore, send back to us and we'll reuse them for you? Is that?
I think that's brilliant. I think, you know, I think if more brands did that, then perhaps they could, you know, recycle the fibres, and there's a lot of underwear brands that are using recycled fibres, so they'll take anything and turn it back into socks, for example. So that is one solution, and I think more people need to do that.
But if they actually do that, because like again, like H&M and Zara, they say that you can also, they always have bins to the front, like donate your clothes, like we'll recycle it. But it is the fact of the nature that unfortunately the threads that our clothes are made out of aren't simply recyclable, the majority of them. So they might be recycling 1% of like what you're taking back to them.
Patagonia is just a very rare example as well. So they are following through what they're saying, but even they claim that they're not wholly ethical, and they are claimed to be, because supply chains are so complex and it's hard to ensure there's ethics adhered to throughout that chain. So yeah, there's not many examples around right now.
Thank you so much for sharing all these insightful thoughts. I feel like I learned so much today. And I do agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I just want to be devil's advocate in it. So in terms of like political and immigrant rhetoric, like growing up as a child of immigrants, and I feel like especially within our community, we can have this conversation, and it's easy to, but these conversations about ethicality, about sustainability often happen in echo chambers. And a lot of these conversations aren't happening with our parents. And this idea of cheap fashion, it does affect people in other countries, but it's a consequence of having to, or what you're able to afford. So a lot of our parents chose the cheapest option because that's what their lifestyle required. And then even then, there's this, like you said, there's a system of this cyclic nature of poverty. And even a lot of us have fallen into it, because obviously, like we say, you know, when it comes to education, when it comes to certain job types, there are so many ways in which we have to overcome. And so even like, whenever me and my friends have conversations about ethicality, it always comes back down to white women, and it's difficult, because even if we're talking about black women or South Asian women in this type of conversation, how do they get to these platforms? Because you have to have a certain startup, you need to have a certain type of fund, and it's not accessible for everyone, so where do we start as a community? And like you said, how do we make it a community project?
100%. That was not devil's advocate at all. That was a wonderful question. Thank you. Everyone hear that? Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, and I think so. That's kind of why I push against the notion that like we can buy the revolution or we can buy our way into changing, because that's just inaccessible. And oftentimes it's like the same communities who are like subject to the violence of fast fashion are also like forced in a way to like purchase from it. So I totally hear you, and so thank you for noting that. I think that the conversation is less like us telling our parents to stop shopping than it is going back into like talking about, all right, like what's happening back at home. And like, why does that exist in the way that it does? I was actually just talking to somebody from Bangladesh the other day, because I'm staying in Whitechapel, so like I'm in basically Bangladesh. And we were talking about how right now there's like also a push in Bangladesh that people are also buying fast fashion. And the fast fashion that are produced in that factories are even becoming so cheap that it's cheaper than the local like tailors and seamstresses in Bangladesh, which is wild. So how can like a Western brand all the way across the world produce clothes that are cheaper than what your own people are producing? So this is not just like also a problem of like the Western world. Like we are unfortunately like living in a world that is pushing everything toward capitalism and everything toward like cheap commodification. So it's up to us to be able to like have those conversations in communities that are directly affected. So I'm sure many people may like have relatives or friends who are involved in some way, maybe in fast fashion back at home, being able to like have conversations with them, like listen to them, uplift their voices. I think that there's so much of responsibility in this room by virtue of who we are, not only from an Islamic perspective, but also our identity perspective, that I think the conversation, exactly as you said, should be starting in our communities about like the larger system. So not about like what should we buy, like what's ethical, but like how can we change the system, like get these corporations out.
Question, I guess. I just want to ask all the speakers really, because this is all about learning, I guess. What would you say, like whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's a book or something, what would you say you read and you thought, wow, and you see and you thought, wow, this has made me really work, this has taught me something. And secondly, that I really want to hear more of your British accent.
Thank you. I watched a lot of Harry Potter growing up. So I think it's divine, but I need to speak with the microphone.
Sorry, I just got completely distracted by the discussion. Sorry, what was the question?
What have you read?
Do you know what? It was actually, I'm a big fan of Wired magazine, which is really geeky and mostly about engineering, but I loved a lot of the crazy inventions, and I pick it up every month, and I don't understand maybe about half of it. Anything to do with AI, I kind of lost the plot of it. But it just made me, it opened up actually my eyes way before I got into ethical fashion, or way before I started Pebble, just of the solutions that are out there and the people really pushing for those solutions and how it's like everything kind of fits together and impacts each other. And I just thought, wow, there's all these crazy people doing this amazing stuff, and it's kind of tucked away in a boring men's magazine, but not, no men. Okay, get rid of big magazines, quite fun. So I just thought, you know what, we need to be telling these stories, and for me it's about telling stories, that's how we make positive change, and I just thought we need to have a more consumer slant on this. We need to take those kind of really geeky inventions out and showcase, show people sort of what we can do and give them that inspiration. So for me it's a bit left field, but there are so many amazing blogs and books out at the moment, especially around sort of ethical fashion and the fashion problem. Which I'm sure you are picking up on your book, international book groups and things like that. What are you sort of suggesting?
Yeah, so we have something called Because We've Read, at Because We've Read, #. So it's a radical international book club. We have a chapter right here in London, which is like fabulous and amazing. They're always at Rich Mix. And so basically, to answer your question, everything that we've read so far, I also agree that I never really read anything about like fashion per se. I think for me, it kind of again goes back to like community organizing. So like Asada Shakur's autobiography was like very transformational for me. Asada Shakur is like a former Black Panther, currently in exile in Cuba, with like $1 million like reward on her head by the FBI for supposedly or being accused of killing a cop. But she was like a very outspoken radical voice for systemic change, and her words have like completely transformed a lot of the ways that I think about the world. And I think texts like that, Orientalism, Edward Said, Intellectual Crash Bay, Ardenti Roy, who we're reading right now. Ardenti Roy is actually joining us on YouTube live next week, this weekend. What day is it? The 20, what, something. She's on our Instagram page. So yeah, I think having conversations locally about like, I think radical community organizing texts of like fabulous people. Did you have
yeah. Tough question for me, to be honest. I think I got more experiences, a little bit, and that's actually negative experiences that probably affected me the most. So what comes to mind that remained in my mind for a very long time, and I use as fuel, is seeing two children who were an 8-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, siblings, and who were burned as a result of an airstrike. And suddenly you get used to that. What made that particularly powerful was the fact that his younger sister was consoling the older brother. And I think seeing that and realizing the lack of sovereignty and power that the young girl had, and that despite that she was trying to comfort her older brother, and contrasting it against the privilege that I have, and the ability that I have to actually do something, that was burnt into the memory of my mind. So that's part of looking back. Maybe a bit too.
To know everyone's experiences and stuff, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing.
Sorry, I thought we had a covered that already. So, with coffee and with fashion, there are these kind of raw ingredients, raw materials that maybe conceivably could be owned by somebody who is not a corporation, like the Sheibani family, or for example, somebody who owns some small cotton or hemp plantation somewhere, right? But what about things that rely on raw materials that are not in the hands of ordinary people, but they're in the hands of kleptocratic governments or big corporations? Things like petrochemicals or the kind of metals that you need for high-tech stuff. So, is it really possible to have an ethical energy industry other than the renewable sector? Is it possible to have ethical high-tech mobile phones, tablets? And if so, do you know anybody who's doing it successfully?
I know a phone company, Fairphone, are meant to be amazing at sort of providing an ethical supply chain for all their sort of precious metals inside the phone, but I haven't done anything with them directly. But I think it's a very complex issue. I mean, it's just everything that you touch, everything that you own, everything that you buy has an arguably very dubious supply chain at the moment.
I think it's particularly difficult with things that have a fundamental relationship with central governments, like you touched upon oil and gas. If you have things that are decentralized, like small scale operations, renewable energy, you can control that because that is in the hands of the people. When you have large things that are connected to the government, it's very hard to do that, and really it relies upon the corruption or lack thereof of the government itself. In other words, you have to rely on the state being trustworthy. Well, then it depends on what your political views on that. So I think it's very hard to do, and that was a problem with oil and gas. I struggled with.
This is like lounging. This is light in space. Great question. Yes. Oh, it's just turned on. Not to get like super theoretical, but like I don't think technically there is no such thing as an ethical business within a capitalist world. And I say that because at the end of the day, if you're not challenging the very fundamentals of capitalism, then you're complicit in it and almost in a way enabling it. And capitalism at its root is violent. Like there's no way that capitalism can be conscious. And I've written about that a little bit too, that I think conscious capitalism is a myth. Because I think that you're either kind of relying on existing structures of oppression to create a product that maybe elevates and lessens violence a little bit, but as long as that violence is still there, it's not ethical. And again, I think that maybe it's a personal decision on like what you define as ethical. From like my own Islamic understanding, like it's my personal obligation to be fighting systems of injustice in order, regardless of like who it is against or for, as the great quote goes. So I think that as long as capitalism exists and it is violent and it always will be, I can't, in my right mind, feel that I'm doing something that's like wholly ethical.
I think, can I add something to that?
Yes.
Because I just spoke about conscious capitalism.
I know.
I think it's a fair point. I think it goes back to your definition of capitalism.
Yeah.
For me, capitalism is free markets and free people. So capitalism for me is freedom. It is, the choice to do what you want as a person, to buy what you want. And that is what I refer to as capitalism. I think there's something else.
Yeah, I don't know if I call that capitalism though, because I think that
it's important to clarify.
But also, I think even if there are free markets and free people, that still exists within systems of violence and structures that are violent. So, for example, like sure, there's like a free market in a sense in the United States, but the fact of the matter is, you only get wealthy if you have money, and that's a product of capitalism. And I don't want to, because this could get into a really theoretical conversation that I don't know anyone wants right now, but we can maybe talk afterward.
I think it shows that the level of complexity for every single question, for every single industry, for every single, like definition of the word capitalism, ethical, sustainable.
I don't want to like feel like I'm dumbing things out. Like that's not. But I do think that like that could be a whole other 40 minutes, and if people want to have that conversation, let's have it. But I think everyone needs to have that conversation, because a lot of people are like,
How can they buy something better, or how can they run a better company? This just shows the level of complexity that we have to get down to. When there are so many different versions of what people believe is the right thing to do, or the right future, or anything else. So it's all good debates.
And the sensitivity of semantics.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Semantics.
And realities on the ground.
Absolutely.
Right, anyone else want to join in?
Hi. Firstly,
Sorry.
kudos to you and your ideas. I think hopefully the fashion industry and business will go towards a more communitarian, cooperative kind of a way. My question is to do with, I heard a lot today about labour exploitation, people in Southeast Asia, but capitalism also leads to exploitation of everything, so that includes resources and animals. And that's where I'm coming from, so I think it's such an important point to have in this discussion. More and more, I've seen more and more fashion companies, large ones like Chanel and Versace, ban fur in their work. I'm not sure if it's fully systemic in what they do, or if it's just a media ploy. And even with the winter season up here at the moment, I see a lot of I see Canada Goose all the time. It makes me really sick, like going on the tube. If someone's standing with a Canada
Should throw up in their coats.
I know like Peter, they go around in New York like ripping it off or something, giving people stickers and teaching about it. And a lot of it, I think, does come down to education. Some people don't know that it's actual real fur. That's probably the reason why this costs like £500, £600, probably more. So I thought, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you think the fashion industry can deal with that?
Okay. I'm assuming, so your question was...
It's exploitation of the whole, and specifically the animals as well. Not just people.
I think that right now, definitely kind of going back to that trend of like businesses are trying to be ethical, and a lot of that also is within like fabrics and like the environmental and sustainability. But what brands love doing is like calling themselves sustainable because they're using sustainable fabrics, which is also we have another conversation about, but they're still using exploited labor, because you can be like sustainable and like commit violence against like garment workers, but that's like also ethical. So I think that people, like brands love using the term sustainable when it like doesn't really mean that you're like a good brand. I also agree in that like a lot of brands are trying to go in that direction, but it also, as you mentioned, it may not be a systemic thing. So I also kind of want to push back against the idea that like all fur is bad. Like there's a lot of fur that like comes from certain animals that is renewable, right? So you just like shave it off and it's like fine. So I'm not against like every single type of fur. I'm against fur that requires the killing of the animal for nothing but fur. Or the idea of like, even like the conversation about like organic cotton. A lot of people like only want to buy organic cotton, but like a lot of Victoria's Secret organic cotton is actually picked by like child slaves across like mid-Africa. And on top of that, organic cotton isn't always the right answer for every community. So for example, like in areas where there's like a huge water shortage, organic cotton should not like be used. Like organic cotton is actually devastating to Bangladesh right now. It's worse off using organic cotton than regular cotton. So I think I'm also sort of against these like global standards of what perfection and pure and like good looks like, because every society is different and they have different needs and like where they should be. But yeah.
Yeah, cool. So more like a regulated industry, so when you're shaving fur or something, you don't go beyond the means that you need to. So yeah, regulation and capitalism.
In a way, yeah, but I think a lot of, there's like vague standards in the fashion industry, and I don't really have teeth. A lot of them are just like, we're attempting to be, or we strive. We hear these words all the time in fast fashion. So I think it also is like, maybe we can have regulations, but like, just like countries get away with everything, corporations get away with even more. So I think rather than just trying to hold corporations accountable, which we've seen time after time, they find the way to like pay their way out of it. I think we need to go back to like systemic change.
Thank you.
So just a general question, or probably more of a point. You talk about not using a lot of systems that are currently in place, and that's ideologically probably interesting or right from your perspective. But the question is those workers in Bangladesh that no longer have a job because of our desire, and I'm talking this on a very, very granular level, unless there's an industry or something to replace that, that means that very, very unfair wage in itself suddenly disappears, right? So I'm not saying that the system is correct, but until and if we have a clear alternative in terms of the way we operate more holistically and globally, you have to have a system that operates effectively to meet those needs. So it's really a deeper question to what is the alternative for you in your mind, right, that would work. Now I appreciate you might not have an articulated answer in 2 minutes, but it's an interesting. You keep alluding to it that capitalism doesn't work. I don't disagree with you, but just trying to understand what practically would work as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that there's this sort of like misunderstanding in a way about like when you say abolition, it just means destruction and not about building. For me, abolition means a redistribution of wealth in a way and reparations. So when I, for example, talk about the abolition of like, for example, we'll say like prisons in Chicago, that means taking money out of prisons and putting them into community facilities like mental health, libraries, schools, and things like that, that would eliminate the need for a prison to begin with. My understanding of fashion is very similar. So I think that if we are able to invest the money into communities locally, then the communities can build themselves up without wanting to have another corporation trying to like do social enterprise work. I think at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with like these corporations maintain this sort of level of poverty and an increased level of poverty based on, yeah, at least they have a job. And that can be an excuse that corporations use, but that's not one that we should be using because we're allowing themselves to be like, yes, and like slavery is better than like being dead, you know, for example. And sure, maybe some people prefer to be enslaved than dead, but that doesn't necessarily mean that like we should be okay with that and that there can't be better things and that we can't actually work toward that. So I think what I'm hoping to do with Luton, for example, is like with this, in an attempt to work with corporations or brands that are right now working with, for example, people in Bangladesh and being like, oh, we're going to now move here. It's not so much as to take their jobs, but it is for them to know that like they are not getting this contract because they are not ethical. And people actually want ethical businesses now. Typically, factories lose their jobs because they aren't able to meet the production rates. So factories are always afraid of losing clients and contracts because their workers aren't working fast enough. So if we can shift that from, it's not because your workers aren't working fast enough, it's because you're not ethical, you're not treating them right, that can also cause a shift within the fashion industry as a whole to be like, yo, you gotta actually get a living wage now or else we're gonna lose a contract. So I think that there's many ways that we can look at that, and this is just one tiny way that we think that we can kind of cause that conversation to shift.
But thank you so much. A round of